And welcome to the Niagara Leadership Summit for Women 2020. My name is Julie Rorson, and I'm really glad to welcome you on behalf of YWCA Niagara Region and our planning committee. Thank you for making time and joining us today. Although we're not able to get together in person, we're really pleased to carry on this tradition at a time when everything has become so untraditional. It is still important that we reflect on our accomplishments, to celebrate women and girls, and recognize leadership in all of its forms, at home, at school, in the community, and around us every day. We are rising together. Over the next 3 days, hundreds of us are coming together virtually from across Turtle Island. And I'd like to acknowledge the land where I am coming to you from today, which is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people, many of whom continue to live and work here. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. This gathering place is still home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, the original inhabitants of the country we call Canada. Acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people, and that we all have responsibilities for reconciliation to rise together.
Good morning. My name is Kristen Smith, and I'm delighted to have you join us today at the 7th Annual Niagara Leadership Summit for Women. I would like to acknowledge how delighted I am to share the virtual stage with Julie Rorson, who, after seeing the need within our region, initiated and brought the Niagara Leadership Summit for Women to Niagara 7 years ago today. So thank you, Julie, for continuing to be an inspirational leader in our community. The Niagara Leadership Summit for Women is a celebration of women's leadership and the impacts that women and girls are making in our community of Niagara. For many of us, it is a tradition where we take time out to get together, to share our experiences as women and girls and leaders, to create new possibilities and meet new role models for the kind of leadership that we want to see and be in our lives. We know that for many of you, making time for this event is important. It's also an extra challenge this year. While so many of us are balancing increasing demands on our time and attention between working from home, taking care of families and children, juggling work, homeschool, and trying to stay well and healthy, the challenges of this global pandemic are real and palpable. As you know, they are particularly felt by women. And this is why this action that you are taking today to make time to connect with other women and leaders, to learn and grow, to celebrate your accomplishments and your leadership is more important than ever.
While we are all feeling the pandemic, it has certainly put a spotlight on women's issues and how women are disproportionately impacted by this situation. But the pandemic has also highlighted many shining examples of women's leadership in action. On a global level, we've seen women leaders like Jacinda Ardern, the recently re-elected Prime Minister in New Zealand, and Angela Merkel in Germany, as chief leader and chief scientist. Women are leading their countries through unprecedented health, social, and economic challenges, and they are doing it well. Nationally, we have all learned the names and faces of Dr. Theresa Tam, Dr. Bonnie Henry, the medical doctors and health ministers who are capably leading us all with compassion and empathy and communication. Locally, our healthcare heroes and essential frontline workers, who are so often women, are leading as caregivers inside and outside the home. We have also watched women step up to start grassroots movements for caremongering, taking care of their neighbors, and taking up necessary and meaningful leadership roles. These are definitely challenging times, and all around us, women and girls and non-traditional leaders are showing us the way through.
But it hasn't just been about the pandemic. We have also seen a massive spotlight on social justice issues led by women, including the Justice for Black Lives movement across North America and right here in Niagara, led by women, mothers, and grandmothers. We saw young activist Greta Thunberg leading an international call to action on climate change, inspiring thousands of youth to get involved locally. South of the border, there is yet another election taking place in which women's rights, healthcare, and employment equity are still up for debate. In Niagara, we saw the creation of the inaugural Women's Advisory Committee and growing solidarity of women in politics who are using their voices to support one another. Women's leadership made the headlines with 4 Nobel Prizes awarded to women this year for science, including science, but we are still lacking diversity. There is always work to do. And we lost the one and only notorious RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, leaving a hole not only in the court system, but also in many hearts as a feminist icon. These conversations are taking place at policy tables and around kitchen tables. Families, friends, colleagues are more aware of the challenges that women leaders are facing and engaging in meaningful conversations about solutions. And that is exciting stuff for progress, opportunity, and the future. And here we are today in the next 2 days to continue the conversation.
Our planning committee is really pleased to continue these conversations right here in Niagara. Our vision is that leadership includes women and girls and non-binary folks, and that leadership reflects Niagara's diverse communities and experiences. We want to redefine leadership and create new possibility models so that we all rise together. We want to inspire women and girls and all genders to recognize their leadership and their capacity to lead, and to do it in their own way. Over our 3 days of programming, we've put together interactive workshops and seminars, networking sessions, information booths, virtual chats about all of this. And we have speakers joining us from all over the world, from Nigeria, Hong Kong, Jamaica, and across Canada, who are sharing their expertise, their lessons, and their leadership with us. The Leadership Summit is always one of my most favorite days of the year. It fills my cup with positive energy and connection and learning. I always meet someone new who inspires me in a different way at the Leadership Summit. I hope you can feel that energy coming through your screen and enjoy the Leadership Summit for all that it has to offer more than ever before over the next couple of days with us.
So over the next few days, we encourage you to use the platform to stay connected and build your network. Connect outside of the seminars and sessions. Meet some new and inspiring people in your community, just like you would if you were in the hallways of Brock. Visit the information booths, meet our partners and sponsors. Engage on social media, on the social media wall using hashtag NLSW2020. The sessions will be recorded and the content will be accessible to ticket holders until the end of November. This year's summit is sure to have all the impact, all the inspiration, all from the comfort of your home. So let's start now, and I know that some of you have already started to do this, but we'd like you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us how you're a leader and what brings you here today. We are all leaders in so many ways in our everyday lives. We know that leadership is not just about being a CEO, a manager, what it says on your business card. Women's leadership is represented in so many different ways.
Thanks, Kristen. I can't wait to meet all of you. The Leadership Summit is made possible by our community partners and sponsors, and I'm very pleased to recognize them now. First, Penn Financial Credit Union is returning as our presenting sponsor. Thank you. You'll see a message from them shortly. I also want to acknowledge Brock University, which is our usual host and continued partner. We have many participants throughout the program, including our keynote today, that have a connection to Brock and the community. So thank you for continuing to be open, accessible as our community university. To our media sponsors, Your TV Niagara, Giant FM, Country 89, and to all of our partners and sponsors, thank you for continuing to support the Leadership Summit and empowering Niagara, especially during this challenging time. We really appreciate your support at the YWCA. And now here's a message from Penn Financial Credit Union, our presenting sponsor.
Penn
Penn Financial is making a truly local commitment by asking all of our new members to join us in a pledge to improve lives and strengthen communities. It goes a little something like this. We try harder.
We have heart.
And we know you do too.
We choose change.
It takes courage to be different.
Driven by purpose.
Having fun and feeling good about our choices.
We believe the prosperity of our members and our community go hand in hand.
Together, we get what we give.
We are truly local, remaining inclusive and accountable with integrity and respect.
Improving lives.
Strengthening communities.
This is our commitment to each other.
Because where you put your money matters, Niagara. Nice work, friends. I got goosebumps there.
Thank you to Penn Financial and all of our sponsors for supporting this annual Leadership Summit for Women. When we gather in person, there would be the presence of a red dress to represent missing women and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The YWCA is committed to equity and justice for Indigenous women, girls, and families, and taking action towards reconciliation. We are also committed to acknowledging Indigenous women's leadership and appreciating Indigenous culture and traditions. Today, we are pleased to welcome Wendy Sturgeon, Executive Director of the Niagara Chapter Native Women. Wendy has extensive training and experience in early childhood education. When she moved to Niagara, she was recruited by an elder in the Indigenous community to work for the Niagara Chapter Native Women Incorporated, who owned and operated the first Indigenous child care center in Niagara. Working with the Fort Erie Friendship Center, she helped to develop and establish Wagiotin Daycare under the rainbow, a model for other Indigenous daycare centers throughout Turtle Island and the largest daycare center in the Niagara region. As the Executive Director of the Niagara Chapter Native Women Incorporated, she has developed key programs in Indigenous child welfare, some of which have been model programs for the province of Ontario. She is a working visual artist, published author, and leads expressive community art workshops for groups, children, and individuals. Wendy has been an active political advocate and continues to push the boundaries for all Indigenous issues, in particular women and children's issues. Elected by her peers, she is now in her third term on the provincial board of Ontario Native Women's Association. Wendy was honored to be a representative at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous People. Wendy enjoys playtime with her granddaughter and family, and especially enjoys seeing people succeed at what they put their minds to. Please join me in welcoming Wendy Sturgeon to the opening of the Niagara Leadership Summit 2020.
Bonjour, Wendy. Gijay Manadu, Nindigenicas, Wendy Sturgeon, Dodem Nume Makwa, Ninda Munzi Doranto. So good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for this welcome. My goodness, just sitting there listening to Kristen and Julie, it blows my mind how far the Y has come and this beautiful leadership summit. So I think it's a fantastic event, and thank you again for having me on for this part of the ceremony. So in preparation for this morning, I just wanted to let everybody know that there were some prayers that were sent up for you, each and every one of you. And when Julie was talking about the light within each person, even though we're virtual, we can still see and feel that light from you. And that's because you are special. You chose to be here at this point in time on the planet. And we are so grateful. We are so grateful that you chose to be here now with us, because we need you, and you bring all the world of gifts and talents and skills and knowledge with you, all of which we need to help survive. and survive we shall through this time and through the coming years. So just in going forward, what I would like to share with each of you is really my, I guess, thoughts around leadership, Indigenous women's leadership, and how we manage to survive through so many things. And really, it is the women leading. We are the leaders in our families. We are the leaders in our communities and within our nations. That's because of love. And so when love is at the center of everything, it gives us all the answers we need. So moving forward, try to have love in your heart and things will go well for you. Know that setting goals is a good thing as well and working towards achieving those, but also understand that sometimes when one may falter or what others think is faltering is actually a style of learning. So there are many ways to learn things and many styles of learning. All those interesting and maybe not so happy experiences that some people may have are a way of learning, and we carry those with honor. We carry those with our encouragement to learn different ways and to try new ways. I always encourage young people to take the risk, try something new, and know that we will be there as older people or seasoned folk, let's say, to help you get up again and try again, and maybe in a different way. So honor those experiences that you've had. If it's been academic, honor those as well, and balance each with the other as we go forward. So as women, continue on, know that you're special and you were brought here to the planet. You chose to come at this point in time and we need you here. We honor you and we enjoy you and we love you. So you are needed here at this point in time, and continue to dream on. And I think that's all I can leave you with. Have a tremendous couple of days. And again, my thanks for having me on. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you for your leadership, your support, and that message of love and prayers for us. Next, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Zimmerman, the Executive Director of YWCA Niagara Region, to speak a little bit more about our organization.
Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited about the 7th Annual Leadership Summit for Women. This is a new space for us, holding it virtually, but I think we've got an exciting program. I want to take a moment to thank the committee, Grace Howells, who's led this committee, a staff member, to bring this experience to you today. So, and I know that there's so much wonderful things in the agenda, in the program, and I hope you will take the advantage of having it as a virtual space and being able to access it at any point. Never has it been more important than now to have this conversation about what it is to be a woman leader. We at the YWCA are committed to ensuring that there are spaces to have these conversations on a continual basis and to furthering women's voices and participation, thereby building a more equitable community for all. If we want to have progress in how we function as communities, ensuring we are creating inclusive spaces for all, then we need to have these conversations. The YW supports some of the most vulnerable women and families in our community. This is done through the housing programs that we offer, emergency shelter for homeless women and their families, transitional housing programs, and skills development programs. I encourage you to take a moment to look at our website, to learn more about the programs and services that we offer, to get a deeper understanding of who we are as the YWCA in this community. It's through this work that we and the work that we do supporting broader community initiatives such as the Niagara Poverty Reduction Network, the Coalition to End Violence Against Women, as well as the work of the Niagara Region's Home for All Housing and Homelessness Plan. It is through all of this work that it has become even more important. We have recognized how important it is to have that gender equity is embedded in our systems and policies, and that there is an adoption of a gender lens as we create the community that we live in. This is the reason why we at the YW have dedicated time and resources to holding this event annually, creating an opportunity for women to come together and talk about leadership and what it means for any of us as we navigate life on a daily basis. We purposefully keep the cost low so that the event is accessible. The ticket price that you've paid, it just covers the cost of holding this event. This year, your ticket price is ensuring that we have the technological capability to hold a safe, interactive, and inclusive event. We are living, as has been mentioned by Julie and Wendy and Kristen, we are living in a time that women has been very, very directly affected by what is happening, both at a local and global scale. Just looking at the impacts of COVID on women in terms of how they've been impacted in their employment, access to daycare, education, just as a few examples of the impacts of this pandemic we're living through right now. We're hearing expressions like she session, a new phrase, as the employment fields traditionally held by women have been so deeply impacted by this pandemic. All of this is amplified if you are an Indigenous woman or a woman of color. We see it every day in our work at the YWCA, in how our staff or the women that we have served are impacted, whether it is in access to daycare or access to housing or taking care of loved ones. We've all been deeply impacted. Through this summit, the YWCA Niagara region is able to create space to have the important conversations about women's leadership, no matter where we are as women in this world. If we are going to tackle the big issues that we are facing today, we need to have these spaces. We need to have women at the forefront of decision making. We need to be able to have the conversations on what it is to be a woman in this community. And we need all voices heard. This includes all races, ages, and abilities, and those who identify as women or who are non-binary. Ensuring we are inclusive is essential if we want to ensure that we're building an inclusive community. This is the reason for this year's theme, Rise Together. It is in rising together, including the voices of those who are most marginalized, that we will come up with the solutions to manage and progress through this time. Whether it's dealing with the pandemic, the economic crisis, racism, gender-based violence, climate change, or the lack of representation in politics, boardrooms, and other decision-making spheres. It is our collective work together that will make the changes we need to have safer, more inclusive, and equitable communities. When we rise together and ensure that the voices of all are heard, we will have stronger, healthier, and more productive communities. We're so excited about holding this year's conference virtually, as it will create different opportunities for conversations, networking, and connecting. We look forward to your participation in this year's summit and hearing about your experience. My hope is that you will find it informative, inspirational, and a call to action for change and building a more equitable society. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you for the work that you do, your team does, and this call to action for us to be inclusive as we drive for change moving forward. So thank you very much. I now have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker. Trisha McLennon is the founder of Culturosity, which helps executives harness the power of people's differences to deliver healthy relationships, respect, and results. She also works as Brock University's Intercultural Communications Coordinator in the Office of Human Rights and Equity and is an elected staff representative on the Brock's Board of Trustees. She is a former assistant professor in the School of International Studies at the University of Ulsan in South Korea and a former instructor of global management studies at Ryerson University. Trisha is the author of the anthology Trailblazing, a published collection delving into the voices and experiences of 17 Black women from 3 different countries about living and working in East Asia. A co-author of an open educational resource on professional communication being used at no cost to students by several institutions in Canada and around the world. Her experience traveling to 18 and living in 5 different countries equipped her to get by in 5 languages and showed her how to march past fear and into more mindful awareness. Having moved to Niagara region on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people, she also serves on the Equity and Inclusion Advisory Committee for the City of St. Catharines, believing in the value of building community. She is proud Afro-Jamaican parent looking to be a good ancestor and leave the world better for future generations. Please join me in welcoming this year's Niagara Leadership Summit for Women keynote speaker, Tricia McLellan.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to express my gratitude and a little bit of awe as well from everything that we've just heard from Wendy and Elizabeth and Julie, and also just express how excited I am to be on this journey with all of you. So I want also for us to just think about the fact that this is the 7th annual Niagara Leadership Summit for Women. And the number 7, I think, is significant. And so when I was thinking about what I'd like to discuss this morning or what could I possibly say, I thought, well, maybe we'll talk about 7 powerful leadership lessons that you can't put on your resume. And so the structure that I'm going to be using this morning is just a series of different stories. And we also have a few poll questions. So if you can hold off on actually doing the poll questions until we get to that point, it would be great. I've also have a little poem that I have done for you. And Grace, who is in the background, is going to be helping me with that a little bit later on. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of insight into where I'm taking you over the next just under an hour. And so I'm going to begin with story 1, which happened when I was 6 years old, so nearly 7 years old. Remember, everything we're talking about is about the number 7. So for some of you who may or may not know, and one other aside before I sort of jump into everything, a few of you really lovely, wonderful people have taken the time to send me text messages or notes of encouragement. And I just want to say thank you so much. You have no idea how much I appreciate that. It has made a difference because, you know, of course, I'm like super nervous, but we're okay. This is really, really good. Anyway, back to the story. So I grew up in what is known as government housing. So I grew up in Toronto in metro housing in a townhouse. My mother, my grandmother, we were a very Jamaican family, 2 older brothers, and we always had people staying with us. So at this point in time, my cousin Neil was staying with us. And one of the things that we used to do every Saturday is go down into the basement and watch cartoons. Now, the reason why we had to go in the basement to watch cartoons is because the older people in the house didn't want to have to deal with the kids on a Saturday morning. So this was just a routine ritual for us. So one day, I came downstairs, and before we go and watch cartoons, we get cereal or something to eat. So I came downstairs. I saw my cousin was coming up to get a cup of water. So he got a cup of water. He walked around the corner to go down the basement stairs. no problem. I pulled out my Lucky Charms, back to the number 7. I pulled out my Lucky Charms and poured them into the bowl. And as I was going to get some milk, I noticed my cousin come back up again, get another cup of water. Do you guys remember these little thermos cups, these little plastic cups that you use as a kid? So he's now on his second cup of water, disappears around the corner, down the basement stairs again. So now I'm sitting down at the table. I've poured the milk into my cereal. I'm about to have a bite. And he comes back up again and gets another cup of water. So finally I say to him, Neil, how thirsty are you? And then he looked at me and his eyes were wide like saucers. And he says, there's a fire in the basement. And then he starts to walk around the corner again. And I'm just looking at him like, what? And then he comes back around the corner and he says, don't tell Auntie Adri. So my mom's name was Adriana. And so everyone called her Adri. And so he's like, don't tell Auntie Adri. And I was just like, I went back to eating my cereal because I didn't believe him. So then I thought, let me just go see what this guy's talking about. And I go around the corner, I open the basement door, and it's like a huge, it's pure smoke. It's pure, like, I don't know how he found his way down the stairs. It was pure, it was just thick with smoke. And I was like, oh, and I slammed the door. And then I tore around the corner, up the stairs, and then I stood at the door of my mom's bedroom. Because in my 6-year-old mind, the most terrifying thing I could do is wake up my mom on a Saturday morning. My mom was a waitress. She worked very hard. She always worked at least 2 jobs. And it was Saturday morning. And I knew that if I woke her up, this could go very badly for me. But then I thought, fire, waking up mom. So yeah, I opened the door, I woke her up, and I told her that there was a fire in the basement. And she kind of rubbed her eyes and she's like, what? She goes, you're kidding. I said, no, mommy, I'm not kidding. There's a fire in the basement. And then so she said, okay, go wake up your older brothers. And I was like, well, you know, they really don't. She's like, go wake up your older brothers. And I was like, okay. So I woke up my older brothers, and they got up and tried to keep things under control until the fire department could get there. But it was really, again, a very overwhelming fire. And one of the firefighters, when they got there, had to be taken away for smoke inhalation. They were able to get the fire under control eventually. We obviously all had to leave the house. And, you know, one of the firefighters said to me, he said, you know, you're a hero. And I was like, what? And he said, if you hadn't done what you did, you know, it's due to your quick thinking and waking up the grown-ups that, you know, you still have a house and you all still have your lives. And I was really shocked. And I just thought, wow, like I never thought I could do anything sort of important or significant, and certainly not at 6 years old. And so one of the things that I took away from this experience is the importance to be brave, and to try your best to make good choices. But that theme around bravery is something I think that we're going to see a lot of here, whether you're calling it bravery, whether you're calling it courage. I think that is a huge part of leadership. And that was something that I experienced really early on. My cousin, on the other hand, you know, if he hadn't told me what was going on, I wouldn't know. So I looked at this situation and I sort of tried to break it down into like what actually happened here. So here are the 7 things that I think happened in this story. First of all, noticing something was off. Every Saturday morning at our house more or less looked the same. And with him coming and taking those several cups of water, noticing that something is off. Then when he tells me there's a fire in the basement, there's this disbelief, like, no, not believing it, can't be true. And then when you notice it's true, there's a reaction or some kind of response to what you've just experienced or witnessed. And then at that point, you are either going to accept it or make some kind of decision about it. So you're going to have to accept that it's true and make a decision. And that's going to lead you into action. In my case, the action was making that decision as to whether or not I want to wake up my mom. And then there's some kind of result or resolution. And the learning from it is that, yes, even as a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old or as a very young child, you can be making decisions that can result in keeping your family safe. And so I think that was a huge learning and a huge takeaway. And that's going to bring us to our first poll question. So in this poll question, I'm really trying to figure out from your perspective, thinking back over the history of your life, how old were you when you first answered the call or found the courage to lead anything or anyone? And what's significant about this too is this is stuff that you can't put on your resume. So think back to how old were you? And so I'm gonna see if Grace can tell me whether or not those poll questions are coming. Aha. Wow. Okay. So far it's looking like, all right, so we're gonna let the numbers come in a little bit here. Okay. All right. Okay. Right now, over 50% of you, 0 to 14. Okay, no, we're back down to 49, but still pretty close, 51%. 14 to 28, 28 to 42, 2%, and 42 to 63 plus. What 42 to 63 is 4%. So it's really interesting. When we think about leadership, we're oftentimes thinking about much older people. But even just with this experience, we can see that the first time that you're called on to do something that is leadership is when you're really, really young. And so again, I think a lot of what we're going to learn over the coming few days is that we all have access to leadership. And it's because of events like these that we can actually stop and reflect and recognize our leadership for what it is. Thank you so much for participating in that. That is absolutely spectacular. Okay. So as I said, the number of 7 is really significant here. Oh, before I move on, would you like to see a picture of me and my cousin Neil? Guys, I went digging to find these pictures because I thought, well, I'm going to be talking for a long time and maybe I should have some visuals. So this is not very scientific. But here's a picture of me in the red jacket and my cousin Neil in the green jacket, sitting on my mom's Malibu Classic circa 1980 or 1981. That there in the background, by the way, is Toronto's Fairview Mall, which is now a behemoth. And that parking lot that you see there has now been raised to build condos. So things change. So I want to move into the second story, which is about when I was around 14 years old, I was elected mini school president of my junior high school. So this story actually begins when I was 12 years old. At that time, I was in grade 7. So first year of junior high, our junior high school went from grade 7 to grade 9. And in grade 7, I ran for class president. And one of the things when it came time to vote that I did was I voted for the other person. And unsurprisingly, they won. So the big lesson there was vote for yourself. And that lesson only came about because once I talked to friends about it, and understood that, oh, that person voted for themselves. My thought was, oh, what a tremendously selfish person. Because the way that I was raised was, you don't vote for yourself, you vote for the other people. Keeping in mind that I come from a family where my mother was the 5th born of 12 children. So in my upbringing, the absolute worst thing that you could be was selfish. And so this is probably one of the earliest examples that I had of really cultural difference coming into light, compared to sort of mainstream Canadian culture. And then just in terms of family culture as well, I was raised much more collectivist in my Jamaican upbringing. So voting for myself, I thought was a selfish thing to do. And then when I heard other people like, oh yeah, of course you vote for yourself. Well, don't you want to win? Isn't that the whole purpose? And I felt kind of embarrassed that I didn't sort of somehow know that instinctively. And so that was a lesson that I learned when I was 12. So when I was 14 and it was time to run for mini school president, the way our junior high was structured was that we had, red school, green school, and unsurprisingly, mine was yellow school. So we had red, gold, and green. And then I think we were named after also some French explorers, Cartier, Brûlé, I don't know. We were Cartier. But so I was the president of the mini school for Cartier, and I became president, at least in my mind and in my 14-year-old ways of understanding things, because this time around, I did find the courage to vote for myself. And speaking of which, as I've mentioned to you folks before, I wanted to have something to show you. So yes, I managed to actually dig out from the sort of depths of various photo albums from the past, the junior high school. I think you guys can figure out which one is me. And actually, the woman on the end, we're still quite good friends. We've been friends literally since kindergarten, and we have children the same age. So there you go. But that brings us now actually to our second poll question. So I think Grace is going to be getting that started. And so that's poll question number 2. And it's really just meant to get everybody reflecting around, in what areas of your life do you need to vote for yourself more? So at work, at home, friendships, partners. Okay, so this is really interesting. Work is showing up as coming out quite in the lead here. Home is not quite a very close second, but it's there too. Friendships, home is catching up a little. Partnership, spouse, volunteer activities. It's like, nope, I'm good. Hey, whoever that 2% is, good on you for voting for yourself first consistently. Yes, that's fantastic. We all aspire to that. It can take us some of us a little longer than some. In certain areas too, it's something I try to remember because it's something that I need to remember. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. Okay. So I'm going to take you guys now into story 3, which is really about, now at this point in time, I'm around 21 years old. So I've recently finished university. I've moved back home. It's an interesting story about how I got my first, well, it's not my first job. I've been working since I was 13 and got fired when I was 13 for being too young, because apparently we have child labor laws. But it's sort of a reflection of sort of a desire for independence and a desire to stand on one's own feet and to, get out there and do stuff. So this is a little bit of an aside story. I was I had gotten a job working for American Express. I lived in Etobicoke with my mom, and this job was in Markham. So living in the West End, this job was way in the East End of the GTA. And so I had my mother's hand-me-down car, and I couldn't even get to Yonge Street without it breaking down. So it broke down, it started filling up with smoke. I could only imagine what people were thinking. I had no idea what was going on. And so I pulled off and pulled into the closest like body shop, or I didn't even know what it was, but I'm like, these people look like they can help me fix my car. And so they said, like, yeah, you're gonna have to leave it here and we're gonna have to take a look and figure it out. And I was like, okay. So I left it there, and I just got on the bus and I went downtown, and I'm like, I don't want to work at this place in Markham. I want to work in my field that I studied. You know, I was a communications major, you know, so I went. In those days, they still had phone booths, and I went into the phone booth and I looked up CTV and I found out where they were. And I went to the offices of CTV, and I was just like, I was just wondering if I can speak to someone. And so, nope, close the door there. You know, I went to CBC. It was a fortress. There was not even any way to get in. So I had to leave there. And then I went to the Toronto Star building. And I got in the elevator, and the elevators, every floor, it said what departments were there. And so I was like, huh, this is interesting. And at the time they had something called Torstar Electronic Publishing. This is when the whole electronic thing, this is back when they were still calling it the information superhighway. Everything was just blowing up in terms of digital. And so the long story short is I went there and I asked around, and they said, oh, you know, they're looking for people at Toronto Star City Search. So then I started writing for Toronto Star City Search, and at City Search said, well, you know, they're about to start up Toronto Star TV. And so I went down to Toronto Star TV and I said, yeah, I want to talk to somebody. And they're like, well, yeah. And so I arranged a job for myself in these places. So all of that is to say, I had to take the bus from Etobicoke to the station. And then, you know, the long story short is it took me an hour and a half every day of traveling on the bus to get downtown, even though I actually lived in Toronto. So, you know, TTC is a place where all sorts of things happen. And one day at the subway station, I'm sitting on the bench, and then I noticed I came up the stairs and I noticed my bus had just gone. So I'm a little bit ticked off, and I sit down on a bench, and then it's like a red bench here. And then a couple of feet over, there's another identical red bench. And so this young girl is sitting there with someone who I think is her boyfriend. So they look like they're maybe, you know, 13, 11, something like that. And so I'm thinking they're just kind of canoodling or whatever. But then I start hearing her say, ew, no, don't, stop, that's gross, right? And so I'm like, what is going on over there? And so I just kind of lean over and I look, and I'm like, that doesn't look like a young man. So then I slide to the end of the bench that I'm sitting on, and I kind of lean over to her and I say, excuse me. I said, is that guy creeping you out? And she's looking at me and her eyes are like saucers, and she's like, yeah. And I go, you know what, just come sit over here. So she gets up and she comes around and she sits down next to me. And I'm like, are you okay? And then she's just a little bit like, no, like she looks really, really freaked out. And I'm just like, do you even know him? And she's like, no. She's like, he just came and sat beside me and started saying all of these really disgusting things. And I said, okay, just stay with me. He's not going to bother you while you're with me, right? And then he comes over and he sits down beside her. So now she's in between the two of us, and he starts doing it again. And I'm like, I lean over and I say, hey, you, I said, stop it. You're creeping her out. I don't know what you're saying, but she doesn't want to talk to you, right? And I said, you know what, as a matter of fact, I said, so I told her, so I got up, I told her to move to the end of the bench, and then I sat between the two of them. And that's when I realized, you know, he smelled like he had alcohol on his breath and everything like this. And I just said, no, not on my watch. I'm not going to let that happen. And so I bring up that story as an example of standing up for others. I feel like at that time, there's a whole bunch of other stories I could talk about and, you know, helping people and stuff like this. But most of the time, it's people that I know. I think a lot of times we sort of see things, especially on places like public transit, where you have that bystander effect, where everyone thinks it's everybody else's problem, right? But things like that, I really do think it's important to stand up for others. So that's going to bring us into poll question number 3, which I'm sure Grace is going to be getting ready. And really, with this question, I would just really like to know, at this point, have I convinced you that you probably have a ton of leadership experience that you can't put on a resume? Yeah, okay. So some folks are like, tell me more. Well, it's interesting. We don't have anybody who's totally not convinced, which I think is great. Oh, that makes my job a little bit easier. Thanks. But yeah, so all of these different things are just saying, yeah, okay, well, what else can you tell me about leadership experience that can't go on a resume? So again, these are the things that happen sort of across your life that you can't necessarily put on a resume. So we're going to move into story 4. And story 4 is from the ages of 21 to 28. So I'm not sure if I've been articulating this very well, but each one of these stories are broken down to different time periods of my life. So 0 to 7, 7 to 14, and then story 4, we're going into 21 to 28. And I'm going to start off that story by telling you, you couldn't pay me enough to go back to my 20s. I feel like story 4 is about a very, very tumultuous time of learning and unlearning. And so there were a lot of ups and downs with work, and there are a lot of ups and downs in my personal life. And what's interesting about that particular time period is I think that's where I did a lot of travel to cope with some of the things that I was experiencing in other areas of my life. So, which really helped me in the sense of, I think that traveling, and not just traveling, but also having the experience of being an expat or living abroad for a time. In other words, coming out of the context that you're accustomed to, being in a position where you have to develop skills around making friends and maybe even building, you know, community around you with people that you're maybe just meeting or just getting to know, I think is a skill set that serves you well. And it's also something that helps you to discover who you really are, independent of the conditioning that you were brought up in. And for me, that was very important. So once again, that same job that I was telling you about that I had downtown, I wound up leaving and going to Cuba. So here's me on Veradero Beach in Cuba after I left that job. And just for posterity, there are a lot of really good looking people in Cuba. And so I met this guy who was really lovely. Always wondered whatever happened to him. But those are my, the Cuba experience. And then when I came back, I got a job that I thought was really just perfect for where I was. I was able to, you know, move outside of my mother's house and continue to pay, because all of this time, you know, you still have to pay for your student loans, right? So it allowed me still to move out of my house. I moved downtown to this cool apartment and I had these roommates, and it was all great. And then one of them started dating this NHL hockey player, and then she moved away, and then we got this new roommate who was a nightmare. And the story I'm going to tell you about that particular roommate was that we didn't like each other. That was just plain. But one day she said, you know, can you please come with me? You know, I'm going out with some people from work. I'm going to be the only woman there. And I'm kind of like nervous to go by myself. And I thought, oh man, you know, that's kind of, if she's nervous about it, it must be for a reason. So what the heck, I'm not doing anything. Let me just go with her. And we go to this super swanky restaurant where it's like a steakhouse, and I'm looking at the menu and I'm like, how can anybody afford to eat here? Keeping in mind, I'm in my early 20s at this point. Anyway, the gentleman who she worked with, and I use that term loosely, came and proceeded to be very, very mean in that very sort of Canadian way that's not very subtle. So they made fun of my skin color, and they would ask me questions, and they would say in response, before I could finish my response, they'd say, sorry, I don't understand your dialect. And I saw her to the corner snickering, and then I realized, like, oh, this is what this invitation was about. It was an invitation so she could get together with her friends and make fun of me. And I was like, oh, okay. So then they were laughing, and then finally they got around to saying, so what do you do for a living? And I told them what I did at the time. And then one of them was like, you know, oh my goodness, she works for the competition. And suddenly they were all like leaning in and wanting to learn more. And so that's when, you know, I just sipped my tea and I said, well, I'd tell you, but I don't think you'd understand my dialect. And they were like, oh. So it was just one of those things where, you know, you are with people who are terrible to you. And at some point, at least my way of coping with that is just being like, okay, that's the game you're playing, you know, let's do that. So that time period was characterized by a lot of those kinds of ups and downs, and what we now call microaggressions. I don't think that I had a name for it at that time, in terms of trying to navigate work life and those different types of things. And so that's why for this section, you know, I would say the biggest takeaway from there is learn to unlearn. A wise friend once told me that it's not about how many times you get knocked down, it's about how many times you decide to get back up. And so I eventually left that job, of course. And then, because me being me, I decided it was a great time in my life, since I was able to save, to move to England and do a working holiday there. So that's a little bit about that time in my life. And so I want to move on to story 5, which is probably one of the most difficult times, which represents ages 28 to 35. And at the end of this section, this is where I'm going to have a poem. Actually, no, Grace, you're totally right. This is the part where I would like for you to play the poem, if you don't mind. So the poem that Grace is about to play is called And Still I Rise. It's by Maya Angelou. I thought it was very on point for this. And so I'm just waiting for a signal from Grace to let me know that it's ready. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still, I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Oh, don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Oh, does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear. I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Story number 5, from the ages of 28 to 35. My mom passed away about a month after I turned 30. And she really went out of her way to prepare me for her death. And one of the ways that she did that a few months before she passed is she sat me down and she said, we need to go look for my final resting place. And of course I said, don't talk like that. Like maybe, and she's like, no, Trisha, I want everything to be settled because when that time comes, I want it to be easy for you because you're going to be the one doing all of the heavy lifting. And I also don't want anybody to come and say that, this isn't what I would have wanted. So I want to make my wishes very clear and I want to have everything set up now. And so I remember going with her and going with my aunt to various funeral homes and looking at caskets and looking at all the other different sort of paraphernalia that went on with it. Were we going to do, my mom was not a believer in cremation. And, the only experience we ever had was, going to funerals where people are buried. But in this one place, they brought us to their mausoleum. And my mom was raised in the country and always wanted to, retire, go back to the country, have that kind of country living. And when she saw the rolling hills from the outside, from where this location was in this mausoleum, she was like, that's it. This is where I want my final resting place to be. And nobody in our family has ever had anybody in a mausoleum before. And so I remember the day of her funeral, there were a lot of confused faces. And it was, her position in the wall, because a mausoleum is like you're inside and they basically put you in a wall and seal you there. And they have, she was like a few feet up, and they have this thing where it's being raised up. Her casket was white and had black angels on every corner. And it was the weirdest thing when they were putting her in. I don't know, the sun just broke out and it was like this light shining on it. And it was the most devastating time of my life. And for anybody out there who has lost a parent or who hasn't lost a parent, you don't ever get over it. I'm not over it. And the thing that was really hurtful about that time was she was right to prepare me, because she was the glue that held our family together. And after that, everybody kind of went their separate ways, and the support that I thought would be there wasn't necessarily there. And the people who I thought would be around sort of disappeared. I didn't have a family at the time to, go back to or whatever. A lot of my life had been at that point about taking care of my sick mom. And so this story is really about remembering who you are. And for me, that was the best way that I could even honor my mom, but it was also important for me to honor myself in that way. And so how you cope with tragedy, or how you cope with devastating setbacks, is important. But I think that really understanding that you have to know yourself very well in order to get through those times in the best way possible for you is a very important lesson that I wanted to share. So that's going to actually bring us to our fourth and final poll question. Which of the following describes your approach to coping with devastating setbacks? So I think Grace is probably just getting that ready, and we're going to see the poll in a moment. Suck it up and keep moving. Surgite! Everybody from Brock is going to know what surgite means. That's Latin for press on or keep it moving. Fortunately, a lot of people are not in denial, at least not so far. Consulting a mental health professional or an elder or a spiritual religious leader or teachings. A few people are doing that, and a lot of people are talking with family and friends, which I think is wonderful. And sometimes people self-medicate. I like food. Whatever gets you through. So the point of this is not, a judgment or accolades around what you do choose to cope with. But I think it's really about, again, coming back to understanding who you are. And for whatever method that you're choosing, is it working for you? I know that there's going to be a lot of information and other folks during this summit who are going to be talking about these types of issues related to things like mental health and coping with grief. And and some of us take it out on other people, right? So I think it's really important to know and have that self-awareness of who you are and whether or not those things are working, especially as we look to rise together. We have to realize that we're not able to do everything on our own. And so I thought that was an important lesson to add in here, and just an important way of helping us understand a little bit about our own motivations and ways of coping with tragedy. So that's going to move us into story 6, which is, for me, the years 35 to 42. So I realize I'm outing myself a little bit with my age, but I'm not one of those women who is like, oh my gosh, I don't want anyone to know my age. Look, I'm 45. Okay. So I'm okay with that. I would assume everybody else is okay with that. I think, I've had a life with lots of ups and downs, just like everybody else. But in this next session of my life, there's a very, very significant thing that happened. I became a parent. But before I get into the parent story, another very significant thing or significant leap that I took at 35 was I moved to South Korea. So that was a huge adventure for me. I didn't know anybody in South Korea. I had never even been to Asia before, but I, had the unfortunate experience of finishing a master's in business administration right in time for 2008, where no one was hiring because we were in a financial crisis. Talk about the worst time to be an MBA. But I stumbled into teaching at Ryerson, and I just fell in love with teaching, and then had this opportunity to go teach in South Korea. And so 35 years old, next thing I know, I'm hopping on a plane to South Korea. And that was actually a funny story too, because I flew over, because I had never flown that long before. I saved up my money and I flew over there business class. And I wound up sitting beside another Black woman. And of course, I'm trying to be brave, but I'm also like terrified. And after a while, we chatted a little bit, and it was kind of like, well, what do you do? And what do you do? And then it suddenly hit me, oh my gosh, this is my mother's pastor. And I was really upset with myself when I got on the plane, because I always, whenever I fly, wear my mom's necklace, and somehow I had misplaced it. And I was like, oh no, I'm not flying with my necklace. And I was kind of upset and sad about that. And then I realized, I'm sitting next to her pastor. So I thought that was a funny part of the story that I wanted to share with you too. But so in South Korea for 2.5 years, I had all of these firsts, things that I never had the chance or just never thought about doing when I was at home. I went camping for the first time in South Korea. I went surfing for the first time in South Korea. There were all of these really interesting experiences. It was funny when I went surfing, we went to the surf shop and we rented the wetsuits and everything like this. And my friend was there like trying to, give me some lessons. And the guy who owns the shop, he comes out and he's just like, oh, I'd like to take a picture. It's like, okay, all right. And so I was saying to my friend, I'm like, does he usually take pictures? And she just looked at me like, no, dum. Like, this is a person who probably never sees Black people. And I was like, oh, okay. So many different fun experiences. One of the best of my life. I would go back to South Korea in a heartbeat. But building community there, it was very interesting. Like, I started playing ultimate frisbee, and I can't tell you how many really interesting and cool people I met through playing ultimate frisbee. We got to travel around together, and it was mixed teams with Koreans and expats, and so that was one of the ways how I was able to build community in South Korea. And when I left, when I decided to leave, I met my child's father on a plane. So, it unfortunately didn't work out between us. And again, very, very, big ups and downs and unexpected twists in that plot. But at that stage in my life, I had been through enough to understand that I'll get through this too. And I just need to make some good decisions and, build community and try to bloom where I'm planted. And so after having lived in BC with my child's father, I actually moved back to Toronto and was very much on my own in suddenly having this amazing little being with me, and doing my best to build community around us, which I believe I did do. So then we moved to St. Catharines, and this brings us into story number 7 around rising together. So here are 7 really lucky things that have happened to me since coming here to the Niagara region and St. Catharines in particular. So moving to St. Catharines to work for Brock University, I felt really, really lucky about that. One of the interesting things is, being able to buy a home here. And again, that's one of the other lucky things. I happen to live on the best street in St. Catharines. So in terms of rising together, the way that I've seen community expressed here makes me feel really, really lucky. I live on a street where other kids play on the street, and all the kids come out and play, and the grown-ups will come out and socialize, where, you know, somebody just takes it upon themselves, again, usually the women, to organize events for the children in the community. And you know, one of the big things, like, we just apparently won the community element for the Grape and Wine Festival just a few weeks back. And that doesn't surprise me, because I live on the best street in St. Catharines, and people really rise to the challenge here in terms of leadership and community leadership. So I'm very, very lucky to have landed here. So seeing those examples of strong communities, or strong leadership in the communities that we're building, buying my first house. There was a very interesting thing that happened this summer when I was taking my kid to camp, which was at Balls Falls Conservation Area. And it was an outdoor camp, social distancing. I'm like, all right, we can do this. This is safe. And so I would take the back roads through St. Catharines and down into Jordan and whatever every day. And then one day, I'm driving, and you know how it is in these sort of country towns, like the house is like way far away from the street, right? And, you know, neighbors are like miles and miles apart. And so I saw this woman, and she was at the end of her very, very long country driveway, right close to the road. And she seemed to be fumbling with this big sign. And then as I got closer, she held up the sign, and she was literally just out there in the middle of St. Catharines holding up a sign that says Black Lives Matter. And of course, once I figured out what the sign said, I start honking like mad. And it was just one of those things where, like, I was a bit overwhelmed. I might have shed a couple of tears, because I thought, you know, who does that? Like, that is an amazing thing to do. So the other lucky thing around rising together that's happened to me since moving here is meeting amazing people, amazing colleagues that I get to partner with through Culturiosity, having amazing colleagues at Brock University, people who are committed to moving the needle on equity and inclusion, which is the area of work that I'm in. And then, of course, you know, really just being thrilled to be able to parent this wonderful, amazing, energetic, bright, fun, kind, curious, and inspiring little person. We began this journey by talking about when I was 6 years old, and sort of coming into my own understanding of like how I could even be a leader. And I'm trying to come full circle now, because I actually went to my kid and said, hey, what do you think about leadership? I said, you know, I have this thing, and I'm going to be talking to a lot of people, and we're going to be talking about leadership. And I thought, maybe you have some things that you want to say. And so she said, yes. And so I want to begin to start the wrap up here of the final stories, the seventh story, with some wisdom from another 6-year-old, my Sienna. And here's what was said when I asked about leadership. The first thing that was mentioned was, okay, here it is in order. Be brave, be kind to one another, call on ancestors if you ever need help, treat other people nicely and kindly, and they'll always be there for you. So again, these are things that I can't put on a resume, but I think that these are things that are very important and very salient, because this is how we live our lives, and we should recognize the importance of all the leadership we bring in all of these various spheres of our life every day. And so everything that I've shared with you up until this point is really just a few examples of looking back throughout your life in increments of 7 years, some of the things that stood out that I can't put on a resume, but that I think are very important. And as we look to the future, especially in the time of COVID, I think it's very important to recognize that a lot of the things that that are going to be required of us and that are going to be required of leaders as we move into the future are things like collaboration, are things like many of the elements that we mentioned here. So I do have something for you to take away. There is a document that's available for download at the bottom of everyone's screen. At least that's what I'm being told by Grace. So if that's not there, you can let me know that. But we are just coming upon 5 minutes to 12. And these are my 7 stories that I wanted to share with you. And I also wanted to point out that the takeaway document also has a playlist. So I hope you do enjoy the playlist. I hope you enjoy the takeaways. It has been my pleasure and my honor to be the person selected to do the keynote speech for the Niagara Leadership Summit for the 7th annual Niagara Leadership Summit for Women. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And I'm going to turn it back over to our amazing hosts.
I know the virtual clapping is very loud and lively right now. Thank you, Trisha. That was really wonderful way to start the summit. Thank you for sharing so much of yourself, personal stories and life lessons with us. That was really meaningful. And you're an excellent teacher. And I just got to say, we are so pleased and grateful to have you in our community in Niagara. So thank you for joining us today. And some of the stories that you talked about, leadership lessons from everyday life, that's really what we're all about at the summit. And those leadership values and experiences that you can't put on a resume, that we are not cultured and taught to appreciate and value, are really what is going to get us through these hard times, is how we want to raise the next generation. And how you tied that all together was just so wonderful. I'm one slogan, I mean, there's so many, but one that I think is easy to remember and take away from this is just always vote for yourself, right? Like that's something so straightforward and obvious, but when we're voting for ourselves, we are doing what's right for ourselves and leading by example in that way and taking care of others as well. It's really great. Thank you. And the lessons from your daughter as well. Be kind, be brave, call on our ancestors, and that we're not alone. This is really wonderful. And again, know that we're all here with you today virtually and continuing through these times virtually as long as that will take. We're here together to experience new leadership opportunities and create change in Niagara in any way that we can during this time. Thank you for all of your lessons and helping us think about leadership differently as we continue on our program over the next couple of days. And I'm really looking forward to that playlist as well. And I also have to say, like, I'm really feeling our outfits right now. I feel like I'm part of the fan club with our twinning going on, and we totally didn't even plan this. Like, I think it's just pretty magical. So I feel good about it. Thank you, Trisha. And to everyone who has been on the chat and polling and participating, it's really wonderful to see so many of you introducing yourselves and being part of this virtual experience with us. So we want to see that continue over the next hour. We've slotted some time for you to have your lunch, get back and check your emails, continue chatting with each other, and use this next bit of time to connect with our speakers as well. And set your intentions for the next couple of days, peruse the agenda and see what other sessions you'd like to attend and participate in. The program will return at 1 o'clock, so about an hour from now, where seminars will begin and continue until Thursday at the end of the day. So take a look, see what works for you, what interests you, and continue to engage on the platform. I'm really excited to dive into the chat with all of you now. Thanks, everyone. It's so great to see so many people online and through the keynote today. See you soon.